performing in Malloy. But in fact, Judy's going to speak tonight about a more recent performance, and it's a really interesting example of how their work has evolved. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Judy. The full biography is, of course, on the website, but I just want to point out a couple of things. So Judy has a BA in Fine Art, that's her background, and including performance elements in that, from the Crawford College of Art and Design in Cork, where she is from, and a very proud Corkonian she is.
Of Cork, yeah.
She studied drama therapy at the University of Hertfordshire in the UK and studied theatre directing and writing with Philippe Gaulier in London. So she joined Gare St. Lazare Players Chicago in Paris, so that's where the name comes from, in 1991 as assistant to the then artistic director Bob Mayer. And Gare St. Lazare Ireland are now their own company. So in 1996, Judy directed Conor Lovett in Malloy by Samuel Beckett in London, and so began Gare St. Lazare Ireland. So she's directed 16 Beckett titles, and some of those include plays, so Waiting for Godot, Rockabye, but quite a number of adaptations, and including the radio plays for RTE in 2006, and the Old Tune, that was on radio, that was a radio production as well, yeah. And of course, Judy and Gare St. Lazare Ireland have also performed work by other people. Moby Dick by Will, Title and Deed by Will Eno, an adaptation, of course, of the famous Melville Moby Dick. Swallow by Michael Harding, The Good Thief by Conor McPherson, The Possibilities by Howard Barker, and so on. So Judy's work has toured to over 150 theatres and over 60 venues in Ireland and over 60 cities around the world. And I just think it's interesting to look at some of the awards. In 2013, Title and Deed was nominated for Outstanding Solo Performance for Conor. At the Lucille Lortel Off-Broadway Awards 2015, she was the Best Director nominee for the Off-West End Awards for First Love. And then in 2006, Gare St. Lazare presented The End, First Love, the Beckett Trilogy, and a new piece, Here All Night, at Beckett in London, a festival of work at the Print Room in London. And then in 2018, both originally in Cork in February and then at the Print Room again in May, I think, Judy directed How It Is by Samuel Beckett, the novel, in a collaboration with sound designer Mel Mercier and actor Stephen Delane and Conor Lovett at the Everyman Theatre Cork, which then was restaged at the Print Room. And Judy is currently undertaking practice-based research at Reading University for a PhD on staging Beckett's prose, with emphasis on her current project, How It Is by Samuel Beckett. So we're looking forward.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, hello to everyone. Nice to be here. Get the glasses on. Okay, firstly, I would like to really to thank Lutz for her kind invitation to speak here today, and thanks to Gunnery and all of the team here at the university. I'd also like to thank Culture Ireland, whose support has made it possible for Gare St. Lazare to be here and to perform in Malloy this evening, as Anna mentioned. And thank you, Anna, for the lovely introduction. Okay, so this paper will focus on the use of theatre space as scenography in Gare St. Lazare Ireland's production of Samuel Beckett's novel, How It Is, Part 1, at the Everyman Theatre in Cork in February of 2018. So I directed this production for the company, and it was made during a 3-year residency at the Everyman Theatre in Cork. The sustained development process, which happened on site of the theatre, is a key factor in what transpired to be both an in-depth study of a singular Beckett prose work, the novel How It Is, and a direct dialogue with the theatre building as analogous material in the adaptation from page to stage. So the theatre itself became an instrumental player in the manifestation of this production. When making this production, I was continuing a 22-year exploration into directing Beckett's prose works for the stage, bringing them from the language of the novel to the language of theatre. In using the theatre as a site-specific space, I attempted to reference the innovation of language that Beckett applies to the novel form in his work of How It Is. In this paper, I will explain how actors, the theatre itself, sound, lighting technologies were employed to represent the novel. Second image, please. Is okay? The Everyman Theatre website describes the building as a 650-seat listed building and a jewel of late Victorian architecture. Originally opened in 1897, it is the oldest purpose-built theatre in Cork, and in the 70s and 80s it was a cinema and was redeveloped as a theatre in the 1990s. As there is no designated rehearsal space in the Everyman, the theatre stage was assigned to the company as the rehearsal space. In January 2016, on our first day of development on the stage, the technical crew lowered the fire curtain to about 2 meters above the stage floor, really just in order to conserve heat. Third image, please. The fire curtain at mid-mast had the effect of framing the view of the empty auditorium. The auditorium became an image and its intended or original function distorted. For an actor, the view of the auditorium from the stage is a familiar one, but for an audience, it would be an entirely new way of seeing the theatre, and it suggested to me new staging potentials. I decided to place the audience on the stage on a bank of seating, giving the space to the I decided to place the audience on the stage on a bank of seating, giving space for the performers to be both inside, that is upstage of the Iron Curtain, and outside, that is downstage of it. The materials for staging the work expanded both literally and metaphorically. So in this paper, I will highlight the spatial explorations and how my directorial choices attempted to directly reflect the literary innovations in the novel How It Is. The manipulation of spatial norms for the audience and the actor and the use of sound and lighting technology was in direct correspondence with the text's experimental use of language. Questions surrounding spatial awareness and space identification were at work. In addition, the dislocation of spatial norms implied a new relationship of audience to performers. The audience no longer looked at the performers from the auditorium, but were now sharing the same space on the stage. The auditorium became part of the gestural or dramatic space as the actors occupied both it and the stage, offering both them and the audience new perspectives, an adjusted, interactive experience, and a disorientation of spatial norms. I was attempting here to place the audience in a similar mode of disorientation to that encountered by the reader of How It Is. So it is fair to say the experience of reading the text can be a little disorientating, as the novel is presented without punctuation marks, in uneven versets, and perhaps more reminiscent of poetry layout than of prose. Even the physical format of the novel suggests an adjustment of spatial consideration and insists a challenge to the way of reading and comprehending what is being said. In staging How It Is, I will present a live three-dimensional event with the text voiced verbatim that would echo the novel's instability of narration, atmosphere, tone, and structural complexity. The novel's setting of primeval mud and impenetrable dark, contrasted with the recurring images of life above in the light, would not be literally represented by the company. I did not attempt to have the actors crawl in the mud, as I believe this would contradict the text's suggested attempts at obscuring the location and identity of the narrator. Instead, I presented a juxtaposition for the audience, now sitting in the bare, unadorned stage in full view of its black brick walls, ladders, ropes, rigging, which would be better described as the underbelly of the theatre. This area, which is normally out of bounds to the audience, would contrast with intermittent views of the elaborate, luxurious auditorium with its red velvet seats and gold trimmings, and would serve as an analogy for the different environments just described in the text. As I mentioned, the actors were also instrumental in exercising some of the text's concerns with identity, location, and locatable voice. Perhaps it will be helpful for me to describe to you just the opening scene in particular of the performance. So, as the audience waits for the show to begin, the stage around them is peopled with busy technicians, the stage manager at her station with notebooks, a microphone, headset, and TV monitor. The audience have access to the backstage area and are privy to all the preparations involved before the show kicks off. Without lighting changes, myself, the director, along with the 2 actors and the sound designer, arrive before the audience and I introduce the novel by title, and I introduce the full creative team. Once the pre-show announcement is finished, one of the actors places a cassette player on the floor, presses play, and we exit the space together. The audience hears white noise emanating from the cassette player, followed by a recording of the text from the first pages of the novel, how it was, I quote, before Pym, with Pym, after Pym, how it is, 3 parts, I say it as I hear it. The stage curtains are slowly drawn, revealing the framed view of the auditorium, followed by a low, rumbling soundscape, and the audience see, seated in the vast Victorian auditorium, the actor Conor Lovett, holding a book in one hand and a microphone in the other. 4th image, please. So, have we got it? That's it? Yeah. So with amplified voice, he reads from the beginning of the text, and simultaneously we hear on the tape his recorded voice saying the same lines. The second actor, Stephen Delane, abruptly arrives through the double doors at the very back of the auditorium, momentarily interrupting the 2 voices. The voices resume, and the soundscape builds with an additional layer of pre-recorded voice delivering the text. As the soundscape builds to a crescendo, the glass window of the control booth at the back of the auditorium smashes. The voice stops, and the 2 actors walk on either side of the auditorium towards the stage. However, before they arrive on the stage, the actor Conor Lovett suddenly appears from stage right, immediately in front of the audience. The audience have been tricked. They understood Lovett had been and was still in the auditorium. As Lovett maneuvers a microphone stand and places it before them, they see that the sound designer, Mel Mercier, now arriving onto the stage with Delane, is wearing Lovett's hat and distinctive coat. Mercier merely acted as Lovett. An illusion has been created, and we realize the sound designer is also an actor. And at that, an actor masquerading as another actor. Ideas contained in the novel around uncertainty of identity and whose voice is speaking have now been suggested in this opening scene. So by subverting the normative values and expectations of the theatre space, it was my hope to echo how Beckett displays a definitive subversion of language, content, and form within the apparently otherwise conventional form of a novel. The absence of punctuation marks, the difficulty of identifying a narrative voice, and the apparent denial by the narrator of the narration are among the many subversions that await the intrepid reader of the novel How It Is. I expected the stage version to leave as many questions for the viewer as to whose voice and from where does that voice come from. During the development period of How It Is, the theatre space in a sense became an open laboratory where an audience's perceptual orientations could be investigated and manipulated in order to access in physical manifestation the language of syntax and spatial structure available and both present in the text and the theatre space. I consider the use of space in the theatre as a language with its own prescribed, albeit evolving structures and conventions. By reconfiguring its normative values, we have an opportunity to rethink and experience this language in a new way. The staging choices I made act as investigations into those language conventions, connecting with the language forms and the language experiments of How It Is. The theatre itself presented as a language of space that could be used to describe the novel. The British theatre director, Peter Brook, following many years of experience working in the theatre, observed, the set, quote, "The set is much more a function of the theatre building than of the play. The principle of decor is determined by the theatre building rather than by the play," end quote. Gay Macaulay points out in her book, Theatre and Performance, that it is at the interface between two spaces, at the borderlines, that the analysis of space becomes most interesting. Quote, "This is certainly the case in the theatre, where the interface between stage and auditorium, practitioner and audience space has been dramatized and elaborated through numerous conventions over theatre's long history." End quote. She goes on to say, the other interface, the one between the stage and offstage, is even more fraught with meaning, especially when considered in its relation to the stage-auditorium interface. End quote. The language of the text of How It Is can be considered experimental, composed as it is of incomplete syntax, fragmentary phrases, and a sustained confusion of source of voice, emphasized by the narrator's narration. Quote, I say it as I hear it, in me, an ancient voice, not mine. Through several readings, a pattern of repetitions and reiterations form a cohesive narrative which can only be determined by repeated attempts at reading the text and indeed reading it aloud, which, in my opinion, can be even more helpful. It can be argued that, like many of Beckett's prose and novels, there is an inherent orality available in his work. To quote Mladen Dolar on this subject, Beckett's literature, quote, "Beckett's literature, written as literature, is, at the same time, the literature of the voice as no other, not only by virtue of its being close to the spoken idiom, but also by being sustained merely by pure enunciation which propels it forward." End quote. In addition to the unlocatable and unidentifiable voice, the images described in the text create a fictional space quite apart from the described mud and dark that the narrator occupies. In both the text itself and the staging of the text, the audience are faced with the challenge of an unstable narrative, and because of this uncertainty of place, so evident in the text, I assert that the audience too are provoked into a state of uncertainty, as they are forced by virtue of the staging choices to question both their role and their situation, as well as the roles played by actors in this theatrical experience. Suspension of disbelief and imagined places are regular ingredients for a theatrical experience, but by introducing the actors by name, as described earlier, I am asking the audience to consider themselves inside the actuality of the theatre, in real time, with the actors in their civic roles, as well as their roles as actors acting in an imagined space and at the same time. The idea not only proposes a spatial reimagining, but a rethinking of assigned roles, and in turn, a reimagining of audience role. The constant focus on identity and place directly corresponds with the text's concerns. The audience are experiencing some of what the protagonist in the text is describing. So far, I have discussed the reconfiguration of audience positioning, the actor's relationship, and the audience's subsequent experience of the text. I'll now attempt to describe the technological interventions which were made to further enhance and relate to the text of How It Is. Some of the staging choices included no additional scenery, controlled views of the theatre space, and both through lighting choices and sound design, dislocation of the voice with sound technology. The performance begins with the theatre space as the setting, and through use of theatrical haze, the auditorium changes to become an imprecise, nebulous, almost outdoor terrain. This spatial distortion suggests an interruption of time and place. The intention here was to echo the text's abilities to move from the dark and the mud into another place entirely, peopled and full of light and full of emotive qualities, without any precise signifiers or indication of how these images transpired. The text itself moves fluidly, seamlessly, and unapologetically between time, space, and alternate worlds. I wanted this effect reflected in the staging choices as well. To quote Gay Macaulay again, "Theatre is a place where fiction and reality come together to problematize each other, What is presented in performance is always both real and not real, and there is a constant interplay between two potentialities, neither of which is ever completely realized." End quote. In my production of How It Is, Part 1, the actors move freely around the space. While the audience remains seated and anchored to their positions, the actors had full agency of both the on and off-stage areas, at times visible and at times out of sight. The manipulation of space included distortion of sound and soundscapes. The actors recorded and live voices. The effect of a disembodied voice and a dislocation of body and voice could occur. The audience heard the text whispered from speakers overhead, even though the actors were located at the very back of the auditorium. Depth of field turned out to be vital in providing a sense of distance or proximity to the audience and changing the perspective of the relationship for both. Sound and space were here employed as unified technological tools, enhancing a sense of otherness and other place. The contraction and expansion of spatial fields became a useful instrument in devising alternate worlds and other places. This type of spatial travel is a constant in How It Is. If we travel in a short space of time through darkness and light, open space and closed space, the audience might have the illusion of entering and leaving different perceptual spaces which provoke and incite illusions of time and space. When the text operates inside this environment, it has the potential to travel and to be perceived through this visual lens, and the visual may enhance, distract, or at the very least should impact in some way, the way in which we perceive the words spoken. The audience are not only experiencing a spatial awareness through visuals, but hourly too, and this way they experience the text physically. To quote George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, quote, "Most of our fundamental concepts are organized in terms of one or more spatialization metaphors," end quote. The text is now situated within a context of spatial organization and its meaning inevitably influenced by the visual and aural effects at hand. The constant drawing of the audience's attention to spatial awareness has a direct influence on the text in that we hear and understand text according to our relationship with space. The spatialization processing was thought of as a way for the audience to have multiple access and ultimately another way to access the text. If, for example, the actor was delivering at very close proximity to the audience, though his amplified voice might be heard coming from the furthest reaches of the auditorium, an effect of disembodiment is experienced. The voice location and identity so evident in and always of central concern to the text itself. A further major source of spatial information in the playtext is more deeply embedded in the structure of the language itself. As Anne Ubersfeld refers to it as a spatial matrix where she proposes a method of textual analysis. Quote, "to bring to the surface the underlying systems of space in the text," end quote. By placing the audience on stage with views of the auditorium, we are resetting the normative values of space and privileging new perspectives. Additionally, this position might have the effect of a shared viewpoint whereby the actor is no longer separated from the spectators and vice versa. When space definition and defined roles are manipulated, the audience are in a state of alert and are primed for listening. The space is set for change and altered. The space is set for change and altered perception. In Beckett's text, How It Is, the use of language is such that it subverts language to the point of dispensing with grammatical rules or normative structures so that the syntax has more possibilities now than ever before. Beckett dispenses with the rules and so brings language to another level, providing another way into meaning and comprehension. Perhaps imagining an audience in an empty auditorium rethinking the theatre space brings a different perspective to the actor and the spectators as combined and separate in their roles. Perhaps the language of theatre reimagined will draw attention to that very language and provide new ways of seeing and comprehending within a theatrical context. Perhaps we enact potential for a combined sharing of forms across disciplines and open the door of perception to transdisciplinary process. And video. Just showing you a short, tiny video clip from the piece. Oh, is it? It is the full one, in fact. It's about
Rags of
5
life
minutes.
in the light. Hear and don't deny, don't believe, don't say anymore who is speaking. That's not said anymore. It must have ceased to be of interest. But words like now, before came, no, that's not said. Only mine alone. One or two soundless brief.
Egg blue sky and scamper of little clouds. I have my back turned to me, and the girl too, whom I hold, who holds me by the hand. The arse I have.
Tired and slow, we toil up towards me and vanish. The arms in the middle go through me, and part of the bodies shades through a shade. But I don't necessarily have to give it to people. No. I can just give it to that director.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Was, I quote, before him, with him, after him, how it is, 3 parts, I say it as I hear it. Voice, once, without, pawpaw, on all sides, then in me when the panting stops, tell me again, finish telling me, invocation.
Perhaps the dark, the my death.
There are moments, there are moments. How I got here, if it's me, no question to me, no interest. But here, this place where I begin this time, present formulation of my life, clutch the sack, it drips. This place, a few scraps.
Closing my eyes, catching my breath, cocking my ears.
I close my eyes, the same old two, and see me head up, rick in the neck, hands tense in the mud. Something wrong there. Breath caught. It lasts, I last, like that, a moment, until the quiver of the lower face, signifying I am saying, have succeeded in saying something to myself. What can one possibly say to oneself? Possibly say at such a time, a little pearl of forlorn solace. So much the better, so much the worse. That style only not so cold. Cheers! Alas, that style only not so warm. Joy and sorrow, those two, there some divided by two, and Luke, like in outer hell. Soon said, once found, soon said. The lips stiffen and all the adjacent flesh, the hands open, the head drops. I sink a little further, then no further. It's the same kingdom as before, a moment before, the same it always was. I have never left it. It is boundless.
It is boundless.
I'm often happy, God knows, but never more than at this instant. Never so, oh, I know, happiness, unhappiness. I know, but there's no harm mentioning it.
There's no harm mentioning it.
Above, if I were above the stars already,
from
and
the
from the belfries, the brief hour, there's not much more left to endure. I'd gladly stay as I am forever, but that won't do. Uncord, sack, and neck, I do it. I must do it. I'm regulated that way. My fingers do it. I can feel them.
Do it. I feel them.
In the mud, the dark, the face in the mud, the hands anyhow, something wrong there. The cord in my hand, the whole body anyhow, and soon it is as if there at that place and no other I had lived. Yes, lived always. God, sometimes, somewhere at this moment, but I've chanced on a good day. I'd gladly eat something, but I won't eat anything. The mouth opens, the tongue doesn't come out, the mouth soon closes again.
Those dragging on ahead, those dragging on behind. Whose lot has been, whose lot will be, what your lot
has been, whose lot will be, what your lot is.
Endless cortege of sacks bursting the interest of all.
Or a celestial tin, miraculous sardine sent out by God as the news outlined this path for his to spew beyond another week.
Semi-side right, left leg, left arm, push, pull, flat on face, mutification, scrabble in the mud, every half yard, 8 times per chevron, 3 yards of headway clear. The hand dips, clawing for the tape, instead of the familiar slides and arcs, 2 cries, 1 mute, end of part 1, before pin. That's how it was before pin.
So I don't know, have we
Maybe have time for a couple of questions, if there are any questions. Only one question, okay. Any questions? Okay, yes.
Well, first off, thank you very much for that, Judy. And I have to say, the paper was incredibly accurate description of what I went through at the performance. So hearing it explained so cogently is very, very relaxing and rewarding for me, because it was such an overwhelming experience to see it the first time. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing the next one. The question I would ask, though, in terms of the emphasis you're putting on embodying the experience of reading, would you then see that different from in terms of performing the prose? What's the greatest difference for you, dramaturgically and as a director, from staging the standard dramatic texts? Aren't we in a certain sense? Because it sounds like this is a very clear decision on your part to not focus on the perception of the stage in a certain sense, but the perception of the reading experience. I'm just curious what motivates that, and what's behind that for you.
Sure. I suppose it would be important to firstly say that I haven't done many of the dramatic texts.
By choice?
Somebody else needs to answer that. I don't know. I haven't looked into that one. But I think just I was always very busy and very happy to do the prose texts, and they were working very well. And so it is only recently, as in the last 2015, that the company produced and presented Waiting for Godot for the Dublin Theatre Festival at the Gare Theatre. So that was 2013. Thanks, Con. I'm not great with dates either. So the experience of doing the play Waiting for Godot there were a number of things. We didn't have the same sort of time, so it really was in a sort of a restricted time schedule and everything. So the experience wasn't fabulous for me, because the way I have worked with the prose texts over the years is over a long period of time in terms of the making. And I like to work that way for many reasons, just in terms of, I suppose, giving space and absorption time to the development of the piece more than anything. But I will say that the experience was very useful in terms of presenting the theatre work as well, because I suppose it really did bring home to me how visual a theatre, Beckett's theatre, is. And how, you know, very particularly in Godot, the stage directions are so prescriptive and so brilliantly realized, and the stage scene is so brilliantly orchestrated and designed. And to be honest with you, I suppose because of the years of seeing the theatre works as well, I mean, they're very close to each other, and you find, I have found myself using very similar visual language in the prose works. I think because it's actually just there, it's inherent in the writing. It's in there already. And so if you allow the work to kind of tell you what to do, it does tell you to make the kind of Beckett scene, or the Beckett stage scenery. So I suppose, you know, Beckett is ever present in all of those works, even when it comes to, in some way, I suppose, designing this stage scenery for the prose works. Yeah, his directorial advice in some way is inside the language itself, and it tells you where to go. That has been my experience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. And I'm sure we'll have other opportunities to follow up discussions. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you. Thank you.